1950, the National Insurrection. It's directed by José Manuel Dávila, which we want to thank. Le queremos dar la gracia por dejarnos usar este documental sobre la revolución de 1950 y nos hace un favor porque podemos utilizarlo como una instrucción so that we can know our history better, which is very, very important. When we talk about la revolución de 1950, we have to understand what it was. I'm going to give you a little bit of background before we see the film. We have to understand that in the American press or the government of Puerto Rico and the government of the United States, they had a different view of la revolución de 1950. In Puerto Rico, the colonial press, as in the United States, they considered it a small skirmish, something unimportant, something that was just going to be led by fanatics. It was led by crazy people. It was led by people who didn't know what they were doing. That was the tone that they gave Puerto Rico, the press in Puerto Rico, and here in the United States. They didn't know that 70 years later, today, we're celebrating it. And we're not only celebrating here tonight, we're celebrating in Boston, we're celebrating in Chicago, we're celebrating in Los Angeles, we're celebrating in Jayuya, we're celebrating in Ponce, we're celebrating all over the island and here in the United States. They didn't know that this was going to be a historical event, one that we would celebrate for years to come. Rafael Cancel Miranda, who spent 25 years in prison as a political prisoner, along with Lolita Lebron, Figueroa Cordero, and Amy Flores, he categorized it in this way. The historical significance shows that there has been a resistance, that the people have not kneeled, that they have been men and women ready to resist, to give up their lives for the liberty of this country, Puerto Rico. From the independence point of view, the summary and the view of what took place is quite different than what the colonial press and the imperial press wanted us to believe. As you view this video, and we're going to begin in a few minutes, as you view this video, I want you to keep in mind que había una ley de la mordaza, the gag law. It was in effect. The gag law made it illegal for you to unite with people. You could not even have a Puerto Rican flag. You could not speak of patriotism. You could not have a meeting and discuss the independence of Puerto Rico. In fact, you could not understand. You could not express your deep feeling for the pueblo and the people and the nation of Puerto Rico. You couldn't do that. If you did, you could be fined $10,000. You can go to jail for 10 years or both. It's under those circumstances that la revolution takes place in 1950, when we had the draconian law, la mordaza. If you understand what la mordaza is in Spanish, la mordaza is something that you put on the horse's mouth to control him. And this is why it's important to have education, because we fight against that. We fight against ignorance. One of the biggest problems that we have is ignorance. And that's why we're having this celebration. That's why we have teach-ins. That's why we have a political education, because we need to understand our history and we need to understand who we are as a people, because they want us to deny who we are, and we're not going to allow it. We didn't allow it then, we're not going to allow it now. Okay? Having said that, we're going to briefly stop the film. I'm going to talk a little bit about how it's going to be done. When we begin the film, we're going to stop it about an hour later. An hour later, we're going to hear from Ana, Ana Lopez, who is a professor at Hostos Community College. And she's going to be talking about the women's role in la Revolución de 1950. So we're looking forward to that. A little later, about 12 minutes later, we're going to hear from a representative, Camilo Matos, who's going to talk about Don Pedro Aviso Campos. And this is very important because we want to make sure that we understand who that person is. It is so important in the history of Puerto Rico. At the end of the documentary, we're going to have an answer and question period. And during that time, you can talk in Spanish, you can write in English, you can use chat to make your questions and develop your thoughts, okay? And hopefully we have present, I know, Dr. Miguel Friol from Minnesota, and he will be introducing himself. I don't know if Manuel Melendez Lavandera is in Puerto Rico. I know that he's going to come in. Maybe he'll come in later on. I don't know if he's present today or at this time, but hopefully he'll be, and he'll also chime in, okay? So we want you to enjoy the film, and we'll be back in about an hour. I want you to sit back and let's learn together. Okay, thank you. We'll be back.
Before we start the film, we're gonna show you a short clip of La Borinqueña.
Despierta, borinqueño, que han dado la señal. Despierta de ese sueño, que es hora de luchar. A ese llamar patriótico, no al de tu corazón. Ven, no será simpático el ruido del cañón. Nosotros queremos la libertad. Nuestro machete nos la dará. Vámonos, borinqueños, vámonos ya, que nos espera ansiosa la libertad, la libertad, la libertad, la libertad, la libertad.
If we can clap, we can. That was beautiful. Good. Well, como se puede apreciar, you can see it's a very, very deep and important message that the film is showing. Ana Lopez from Hostos Community College is going to talk to us and talk a little bit about the women's role in the struggle at that time. So, con ustedes, please welcome Professor Ana Lopez. Go ahead, Ana. Ana, can you hear me?
I could hear you, but I'm not the speaker's view. Can you see me as the speaker's view? There.
Luis? Okay, thank you.
Buenas tardes, buenas noches a todos. Gracias por venir a ver esta película. Mi nombre es profesora Ana López y soy profesora en el Colegio Comunal Eugenio María de Hostos en el sur del Bronx. I want to do a shout out to my students that are on board. They're here watching this documentary too. So quiero dar reconocimiento que tengo los estudiantes de mi clase viendo este documental. Bienvenidos a todos. Lo voy a decir en inglés primero y después hacer una breve traducción en español. Y eso es debido a que tenemos personas que están viendo el documental de diferentes partes de los Estados Unidos, de la diáspora, y entienden mejor si lo hacemos en inglés, pero voy a hacer en los dos idiomas, si me permiten, por favor. Pues quiero hablarles de la heroína Blanca Canales Torresola, Ella nació el 17 de febrero de 1906 y falleció el 25 de julio de 1996. Y nació en el barrio Coobey de Jayuya. Es ahí donde está la casa de ella, y la casa de ella es hoy en día un museo para todo el mundo ver sus escritos y más o menos estas cosas, ¿no? So I want to say Blanca Canales was born on the 17th of February, 1906, and died in July 25th of 1996. And she was born in the town, in the village of Coabay, Jayuya. She was an educator in the rural schools in the area of Jayuya, and a social worker. She was responsible for raising political consciousness of young people and bringing pride of the Puerto Rican identity. And I heard from other nationalists how she recruited them and taught them about their identity and being proud of having a Puerto Rican flag, even though the flag was under the law of the gag law was illegal it was illegal to talk about independence, and it was illegal to use the Puerto Rican flag and display it in any way. The penalty was 10 years of imprisonment. So even with that in mind, she still educated young people about that. She came from a independence family, a family that was involved in the independence movements early in the 19th century. She was the cousin of Elio and Griselio Torresola. And later on, we're going to find out more about Griselio Torresola and what he did on November 1st of 1950. And she heard Don Pedro Albizu Campos speak in Ponce as the Nationalist Party president. And when she heard him speak, she agreed with his political analysis and became interested in becoming a member in the Nationalist Party. And she joined the Nationalist Party in 1931. And upon even her joining the Nationalist Party, she took it upon herself to create inside the Nationalist Party a branch of the nationalist women. And she called that group of women Las Hijas de la Libertad, the women of freedom. And my conversations with Blanca, I had the privilege to have met Blanca. I had the privilege to have met many of the nationalist women like Carmen Perez, Isabelita Rosado, Lolita Lebron. I was able to meet with them and talk to them and get a lot of the firsthand information that I have. And one of my conversations with Blanca, she tells me that Don Pedro would visit her in Jayuya to discuss politics and considered her a confidant. And Don Pedro had a circle of nationalist women that were his confidant and part of his security team for the Nationalist Party. And it was obvious there was some testimony in the documentary that talked about how Doris Torresola and Blanca Canales even received the military training from the inside the Nationalist Party. So that would explain why she was a confidant. I want to say that in my conversations with Carmen Perez, for example, she explained to me that when she was recruited to be a member of the Nationalist Party, she was asked by Don Pedro, well, Carmen, you know, what area of work would you like to do? Do you want to be a nurse? Do you want to go in the area of providing assistance in domestic chores? And she said, no, don't talk to me about that. Yo quiero ser seguridad. I want to be part of security. And Don Pedro said, beautiful, you know, that's what you're gonna do. So you saw what the women, the role the women play in the revolutions, in the uprisings was vital. In particular, Blanca Canales was in charge of maintaining count of all the arms and weapons that they had. They said that Jayuya was well prepared in all aspects for the revolution. So I also want to say that that Don Pedro made a very strong point that women play a very vital role in the nationalist movement. He saw that as something that was so important that even in his speeches, if you listen to his speeches, he constantly makes a comparison of La Madre Patria, he uses the name mother. He talks about, he challenges society to fight and protect and create a free Puerto Rico for the women and the children. He always uses that in his discourse. So definitely, he believed in the freedom of Puerto Rico within the context of the liberation of women. I did a whole presentation on that. It's in Hunter College, so if people want to look it up. There's a documentary in Hunter College about that. Blanca and her comrades organized and led the uprising in Jayuya. First, they were confronted with crossfire in the police station. And then they took over the post office, and in the post office, and why the post office? Because the post office was federal property. The post system in Puerto Rico was on the federal, it was in the federal domain. And they placed the Puerto Rican flag afloat, declaring the first Republic of Puerto Rico. So why was that an act, a criminal act for the United States and for the colonial government in Puerto Rico? Because it was against the rule of the gag law, which said you cannot do that. You cannot speak about independence and you cannot display the Puerto Rican flag. After they declare that, Carlos Irizarry was wounded, and I think that's some testimony that we see in the documentary. And she takes him to the hospital in Utuado. And she tried Jayuya, but that one was closed. So she took him to Utuado. And basically his life was saved. Blanca is then arrested and accused of killing a police officer and wounding 3. The reports state that she was in charge of the gathering the arms and weapons for the revolt. So she was targeted. She was really being watched over by the authorities. And a brief trial, she was condemned to life imprisonment plus 70 years. And on June of 1951, she was transferred from Puerto Rico to Alderson Prison, federal prison in West Virginia. And Alderson Prison, we have a lot of history with the federal women prison there. Lolita was sent to that prison, and subsequently in the 80s, Ida Lucy Rodriguez, and Aide Beltran Torres was sent there, and they were kept in a control unit. And they were the members of the Fuerzas Armadas de Liberación Nacional. So we have a history of knowing this prison in particular. And she was sent there, and in 1954, Lolita was sent to Alderson. And in 1956, she was transferred to a women's prison in Vega Baja, where she joined other nationalist women like Carmen Pérez, Isabelita Rosado, Doris Torresola. And there were a total of 68 women that were arrested because of the uprisings that took place in Puerto Rico. And in 1965, Don Pedro Aviso Campos is released from prison with a pardon from Governor Luis Muñoz Marin. He loses the elections, and then Blanca Canales is released in 1967. She was given a pardon by Sanchez Sanchez Villegas. I don't know if I'm saying his name right. After her release, she continued struggling for 90 years until she was 90 years old. So the importance of the 1950 uprising and the women's role is that we need to restore our historical memory of Puerto Rico's history against US colonialism and imperialism. We need to make visible our heroes and heroines, and we need to say their names and know their contributions and safeguard that, because they safeguard our nation and identity. We need to make visible and insert them in our Puerto Rican history books, the women in struggle in Puerto Rico for independence. And in the 1950s, there were more than 100 women that we need to emulate their examples of love for La Patria and their courage and struggle to forge and declare a Republic of Puerto Rico. We need to emulate their fighting spirit and determination to win. Tener las ganas de luchar y ganar como lo hizo Blanca Canales. So in summary, in Spanish, doy un recuento de Blanca Canales que hizo en 1950, cómo se preparó políticamente, como también fue una persona de confianza de don Pedro, y también cómo fue encarcelada, fue dada con condena perpetua, estuvo en la cárcel en Alderson, West Virginia, y después Lolita la mandaron a esa prisión, que esa prisión tenemos un historial de donde las mujeres de la lucha por la independencia en Puerto Rico ha sido mandada. Después, en 1956, ella fue trasladada a Vega Baja, y ahí estaban las otras mujeres nacionalistas como Carmen Pérez, Isabelita Rosado y pues 68 otras mujeres. Y hice hincapié de que don Pedro veía la importancia de la independencia de Puerto Rico atada a la liberación de la mujer, y por eso que la mujer jugaba un papel muy importante dentro del Partido Nacionalista. Y lo que trato de inculcar es que tenemos que ser nuestras mujeres visibles en la historia, insertarla en nuestra historia y seguir su ejemplo, su espíritu de lucha, su determinación de tener las ganas de ganar para liberar a Puerto Rico del yugo colonial de Estados Unidos. Gracias.
Oh, thank you for all that information, Ana Lopez. That was a great intervention. Very inspiring, the struggle que los nacionalistas dieron, and the braveness, lo bravo que eran. We're going to hear a little bit from Camilo Matos, who's going to talk a little bit about Don Pedro Aviso Campos and anything else that he wants to handle, give us and share. Camilo?
So just wanted to mention a couple things about Don Pedro. So they mentioned that he graduated with a law degree from Harvard, but Aviso Campos was also graduated from the University of Vermont with chemical engineer. So he was also an engineer, and he spoke several languages. While in the military, he saw the treatment of Black soldiers in the South, because he was stationed in the South during World War I, and he saw the treatment that the U.S. Government had against their own soldiers because they were Black. In his international work, he helped Ireland and India. He helped, as they mentioned, Ireland and India for their independence while still in Harvard. But he was, because of his intelligence and his know-how, he was asked to help draft the first Constitution of Ireland. So he actually participated in the drafting of the first Constitution of Ireland. Upon returning to Puerto Rico, he already knew that he wanted to take up the struggle for independence. And he was quickly elected. Soon after he joined the Puerto Rican Nationalist Party, he was elected to vice president of the Puerto Rican Nationalist Party. And one of his first tasks was to do a trip around Latin America, which included Cuba, Dominican Republic, Haiti, Mexico, Peru, among other countries. And this showed his importance of international, of taking the struggle internationally, and also having solidarity, because the Nationalist Party is a pueblo organizado para la liberación de pueblo, the people organized to liberate the nation. But he also had he was very international, and one of the second platform of the Nationalist Party once he became president was the immediate independence of Puerto Rico, the establishment of la Federación de las Antillas, the Federation of las Antillas, which is Haiti, Cuba, and Dominican Republic, to become a federation, and then to continue on to create the vision of Bolivar, which is a Gran Colombia. One of the other things he did was show that the illegality of the Treaty of Paris, right? The U.S. justified the occupation of Puerto Rico using the Treaty of Paris, saying that they won it in a war against Spain. but Puerto Rico already had achieved autonomy, and an autonomy that Spain had written that it cannot be altered without the consent of Puerto Rico. That gives us a voice in our own destiny, you know, our own sovereignty. And because of that, the Treaty of Paris is illegal because Spain had no right to cede Puerto Rico to the United States. One of the things he implemented is because of the illegality of U.S. occupation of Puerto Rico is the non-collaboration. So he implemented non-collaboration in the U.S. Army, in the draft, in U.S. elections, not recognizing U.S. authorities, whether those were the police or the courts of the U.S. in Puerto Rico. I wanted to also mention a couple other things, is that Ivan, they were talking about right there, the revolution in Mayagüez. Even Flores was from Cabo Rojos, but he was participated with the junta from Mayagüez. So even Flores actually participated in both the 1950 uprising and in the attack on Congress in 1954. So he's distinguished in participating in both. There was a little small error because there was a group that continued fighting in Mayagüez. They started a guerrilla warfare in Mayagüez, which took longer for the cops to apprehend them. And one more thing I wanted to mention was Laura Meneses. Ana Lopez talked really thorough about the women in the Nationalist Party, but even his own wife participated in the struggle for independence. There was a lot of assassination attempts on Albizu's life throughout the years, and for the safeguard of his children, he asked his wife to take his children to Peru, where she was from. But he participated in the struggle. She continued to meet and advocate for the independence of Puerto Rico throughout Latin America. And she ended up in 1959, ended up in Mexico, where she became friends with Fidel Castro and Che Guevara, and was actually there when they both met. And because of her intelligence and her know-how, she was a graduate of Harvard too, with law, and she was tasked, when the Cuban Revolutionary triumphed, she was tasked with becoming the representative of Cuba to the United Nations. And so the Batista regime had totally taken all the documents and stuff from the Cuban mission to the United Nations. So she was tasked of actually building that mission back up, and to use that to continue advocating for the independence of Puerto Rico. So there's just a couple of things I wanted to put in there.
Wow, thank you. Man, that's a lot of information, a lot of background information. I didn't know a lot of this. They're really, really good. That's, wow, that was amazing. We're gonna get back to the film, and then we're gonna go into the answer question period. Vamos a tener una sección de pregunta y respuesta. Y gracias, Camilo, por esa información que acaba de dar. Había muchos anécdotas, detalles que no sabíamos. Fantástico. Gracias por tu contribución.